When I was a kid, my dad got transferred to Calgary and lived up there for like 8 years and got acclimated to the Canadian lifestyle up there and was in, went to the Calgary's Stampede for like 8 years in a row, and they always had a parade, which they had the Mounties at the front of the parade, and it was pretty impressive with their red and blue. So I just kind of liked Mounties ever since, even after we moved back to Oklahoma after that, I still liked Mounties. So anyway, I, through happenstance, acquired a gun, in which this was the first one right here. And I did some research on it and found out it was issued to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. So then, as time went on, I got other guns, like this one. I'm too close to. I'm trying to think when I got that one, or this one. I think I got this one like 22 years ago or something like that. I got this one like 25. Anyway, so I got them sequentially, and then I started figuring out they're different. You know, some of them are different. So let me get started. I'm talking primarily about sidearms of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So the history of the RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, started shortly after Canada's confederation, and so that happened in 1867, and each province that joined Canada, the Dominion, had its own police force. And so the Dominion police, they were there to protect the Parliament buildings, but not necessarily the rest of Canada, the territories. And so you can see, here's a picture of Canada in 1870, and look at the area of the Northwest Territories that the police had to somehow put law and order to. And so they created the Northwest Mounted Police. And that's what originally they were. And so after they created the Mounted Police, they were tasked with policing that huge territory, which is almost the same size as the lower 48. Here is the picture of their first uniform, which they took off a British Hussar uniform, and that's what they styled it after, with the red tunic. And then originally they had gray pants, and then they changed it to the blue pants with the wide yellow stripe, as you see here. A museum in Cheyenne had decided to sell some of their surplus uniforms. And sure enough, this uniform was over there. And so at Jarvis's encouragement, I bought this uniform. And it did not have the hat, but I got everything else. And so I had a uniform. And I was talking to George Muller, and if you ever were at his place, when you went down the stairs, he had like this samurai armor on a mannequin. And I was telling him I had this uniform, but I needed to get a mannequin. He said, I just sold that suit of armor, that samurai suit of armor, so you can have the mannequin. So I thought he wanted me to borrow it, and he wouldn't take it back. So anyway, I put the uniform on the mannequin, and I neglected to mention it to my wife, and I put it in the basement. And so anyway, like a day or two later, I hear my wife screaming, there's a man in the house. And I explained about the uniform, and my daughter doesn't like it either. But anyway, so I have the uniform, and ever since I fondly referred to him as Manny. And when he's at home, he's covered, so that we don't have a mishap again. And here's some of the Mounties that are, and you can see their uniforms are very similar to what they have now, and what they have on their laps are riding crops for their horses because they weren't mounted. This is an interesting picture. It shows the Northwest Mounted Police camp life for the constables in the Yukon. And they had .450 Boxer caliber Adams revolvers, Trainer revolvers, and there was a display of those Trainer revolvers at our show. And then the Enfield Mark II revolvers. The .455 Ely caliber was introduced in 1882, but all these revolvers used black powder, and they fouled easily. They're heavy, bulky, and not too suitable for their use. The other thing that's interesting in this picture, you'll notice a double-barrel shotgun. And the RCMP for crowd control ordered a number of English shotguns, double-barrel shotguns, for crowd control in the Yukon because they were outnumbered, vastly outnumbered. And so in 1973, at the centennial of the birth of the RCMP, they went through, they have a museum in Regina, Saskatchewan, and they were going through the museum. They found 2 of these shotguns in there, plus some other guns, and they destroyed them. And the reasoning for destroying them was because these had Damascus barrels, and they were afraid that if they sold them to the public, somebody would put a modern ammunition and it would injure somebody. But whoever would have bought these would have been buying them for collectible reasons. But that is the current practice in Canada of the RCMP. Any guns, sidearms, any guns that are, once they become obsolete for the department, they destroy them. And so we fast forward a few years to 1902, the Northwest Mounted Police Controller, that's a picture of him, Controller White, invited arms manufacturers to compete in and see which one would be the best, and they were competing for the sidearm for the RCM, or for the Northwest Mounted Police. And so you had Enfield, you had Adams, you had Smith & Wesson, you had Colt, you had a number of companies competing to get the business. And as I say here, they chose the new service revolvers, and the price was $15 a piece. And so they ordered 700 of them. And these 2 guns were part of that first 700 that were delivered. And they're marked on the back, and you'll see I have pictures of them that I took, but they're marked on the back with the issue number, so they have their own serial number, of course, and then they said Northwest Mounted Police, NWMP, and then this one's 433. That one over there is number 47. And that was factory, put on by the factory, so when you get the letter from Colt on that, it will show that Northwest NWMP and then the number on in the letter, so that it shows the serial number that's inside the crane, and then it shows on the frame inside the crane, and then it also shows that number, which is your number for the Northwest Mounted Police number. And then, well, I'll show you in another slide. Oh, rats. There we go. Then in 1904, after these are delivered and marked Northwest Mounted Police, Great Britain's King Edward VII awarded the title of Royal to the Northwest Mounted Police. So a couple things are behind that. When Edward was a Prince Regent, in other words, Queen Victoria, his mom, was still alive, he did a tour of the Commonwealth. And so he went to Australia, went to Canada, went to India. And so anyway, when he was in Canada, the Northwest Mounted Police were his escort. It's his personal escort. And then in 1902, 1903, one of his sons, which would become King George V, and his family were touring the Commonwealth or the Empire. And when they were in Canada, the Northwest Mounted Police were his escort as well. And so they got such favorable compliments by both his son, and he remembered it when he went through there when he was a prince, that played a big part in them being bestowed royal on there, which is a big thing in the British Empire, and it certainly was back then. So anyway, he gave them from there on out, it was named the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. So Colt, being the supplier of these guns, took advantage of that. And here's a counter brochure, and here's one of the original counter brochures. And you can see a Mountie is getting the bad guy. And of course, he's using one of Colt's guns. And so the quote on the inside, it says, "Military men the world over have been equipped with the Colt New Service. That famous organization, the Canadian Royal Northwest Mounted Police, have used this model for years. So to hardy men, ones that can hold one of those, of action, we especially recommend the Colt New Service revolver." So this is basically, they're using that as their endorsement. In 1912, the depot in Regina is where they were kind of, would go out disperse over the Northwest Territories. Well, in Regina, they had a depot where they had extra guns that were unissued. And the depot burned down in 1912, and they lost a lot of these early guns were destroyed. And so between 1912 and 1914, they ordered 650 revolvers to replace those that were damaged or destroyed, plus arm new guns for new recruits and so forth. And so this is one of those. This was shipped in 1914. And
what caliber?
So at this point, these are all 455. Ely 455, and these are some examples. Here's like an old Winchester one, and one from Dominion, which is in Canada. So anyway, you had a number of these destroyed, so they replaced them. This one right here is the one I was referring to that was replaced, and it shipped to the Royal Northwest Mounted Police in September. And then this is the backstrap. And so when they ordered these, you had a new superintendent, and he didn't order from the same place when they ordered these, where Colt engraved the NWMP in there. They ordered it, just these guns, and then the armor had to stamp them. That's why it's cruder stamped, if you look at that. They continued the numbering system, but they're cruder stamped, as you can see. Royal Northwest Mounted Police, but they had a hard time, because that's a curved backstrap, and they had a hard time placing the stamp on there. So you have 701 through 1350. And then on the bottom, on the butt, they would mark them. So they have two different kinds. One's a fused stamp, which was placed by the armor, which that M and P, where the M and the P are fused together. And so that's on a lot of these early ones. And then they also had a block type where they stamped an M period, P period. So that's what's on the bottom on the butts of these guns. And then this was kind of the question before that came up. So they were 455 Ely until about 1919, and then they went to 45 Colt or 45 long Colt after that. So these early guns, these three early guns are 455 Ely. From 1919, these guns are 45 Colt. And they're not 45 ACP, it's long Colt. So,
Craig, did they have to have a longer cylinder for the 45 Colt than the Ely?
no, the cylinders are, if you look, they're identical.
Okay.
But I think what you have here is what happened is Colt adapted these to fit the 455 Ely, but they weren't going to change their model, you know.
Oh, sure.
And, one other thing I kind of neglected to mention that's not in my presentation, but trivia. These barrels are single action barrels. So these actually would screw on a single action of that time period until, this 1914. So the only difference between these and the single action is just your front sight. So on a single action, it'd be more rounded front sight, whereas these have that special curve. But it's the same barrel. Same rifling, everything. And then what's interesting, as we get into World War I, Colt and Smith & Wesson came out with a Model 17, 1917. What Colt did to change up their new service is they changed the barrel. And so if you look at this, you can see that has kind of a tapered barrel here, whereas the old ones are just a straight one like a single action. And so these ones were made basically at the same time or right after the model 1917 was being made. So it has a lot of the characteristics of the 17. So what you have is three different, throughout the phase of when they first came out to the very last, you have three different styles of frames. And you can see how this one is really straight. If you look at, and the sighting, this has a hump on it. And what they did is they went on this are the first ones. And here's the second. Well, this is the second one, or this is still part of the first one. Yeah, and then here's the second one here where they have a tapered barrel and they changed the frame slightly so it's more ergonomically to hold it. And then this is the third one. And this is, I picked this up in Houston, oddly enough. And what this is a, and I'll get to it later, but it's a frame that would be in your planning room where you'd use this as a template. In 1920, they combined, the Canadian government combined the Dominion Police with the Royal Northwest Mounted Police and renamed the police force the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So that was in 1920. So you see these guns that came in 1919 but were marked after they had made that change. These say, like this one, what's interesting here, this one says Royal Northwest Mounted Police, and this was just like a few months before this one. This one says Royal Canadian Mounted Police stamped on it. So this one was when they were still in 1919, and this one got stamped in 1920 after they'd made that change. So that's just subtle differences, but it's kind of cool that you have one that's in the past and one that's looking toward the future. And that's the one I show here, is the one that from has the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and then it's number 2212 on the butt.
Is that stamped at the factory, or was that hand stamped?
No, that's hand stamped by an armorer. Once it got to them, they just randomly pick them, okay, let's open a crate, stamp, 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 and they just progressively stamp the numbers. And you can see they gradually go up. This one's 47, this is 443. This one's 935, they just keep going up. So here's a frame I found in Houston, at a gun store in Houston. It's totally random. But anyway, it's a pattern template, and what's stamped on there is Model E. This model correct for outline top and bottom, trigger guard, and profile holes in stock, mortise hole and stock pin hole correct to master plate, applied by conference 12/13/20. So what they do is the engineers at Colt would get together and have a conference and decide, is this design better or that design better? And when they settled on one, which was this one, they engraved it as such. Anyway, these are the three different styles of or configurations of frames that they had. And you can see slight differences. And in this last one, you can see that they changed kind of the size of the stocks on this one. These old rubber ones, they were a lot bigger. As you can see, they go up a lot further, whereas this one's less of a circle in there. And then you come to this one here, the very last one, and this is in the third style. This one, so I have one here, these two actually, that were in the first shipment. And this one is in the very last shipment. And it was shipped in 1942, in July of 1942, and that would have been, I think, right after the Battle of the Coral Sea, right about that time period when the United States was dealing with some major Japanese battles and so forth. And so you're thinking, well, how did the RCMP get these guns when we were needing guns? Well, so what Colt did is they got away, not a pass, but a government approval to sell to our allies, to any government or military or pseudo-military unit. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police sent a battalion in World War I, and they also sent people in World War II to fight in the war. And so they did send, even though this is way after the start, this was literally the last 100 new services that were shipped out these were shipped to the RCMP. And the other thing about that, the fact that they were shipped in July of 42, the other thing about it is this last batch had the factory numbers. So the numbers you saw that were factory in the very first batch, and then armor stamped after that, were factory stamped on the last batch. And so this is part of the last group that were shipped to the RCMP.
No.
But anyway, what was cool is that in 1964, they made them whatever they had in their stores, which would be a variety of these things, available for constables to purchase. And like I said in my slide here, $12 a piece. And they had a small number that had never been issued, like this one. Had never been issued, but you could buy one. You could buy one of these for $12 or one of those for $12. Whatever one you wanted, or you could take the one that you had used or your dad had used or whatever, and buy that. So, but what they did after 296 were purchased, they put the rest of them the remaining inventory were turned over to the Crown Assets Disposal Corporation for public sale. So they sold them to the public and probably got a little more for them, but not much, in $64, $65. But anyway, that was the last of these. And I think like this one was one of the ones that was unissued. And I was in Kansas City, I'd say 20-ish years ago. I saw another one. And I'm like, and that's one of those things that happens to gun collectors when you don't buy a gun. You
Any
never
idea?
forget it, right?
Any idea how high they go? That's 2707. Any idea what the stop number is?
I think they were in the 3,000-ish range, yeah. The uniform, the hat, all that is world renowned. It's known. You see it, you know it's a Mountie. And so I just, when I was a kid, it kind of stuck with me, and I've liked collecting these guns ever since, and it's been fun to do, unless you don't buy one that you see. I even remember the price, and I know I could have got the guy down. That's the sad part. I mean, it was $22.50, and I think I could have got it for $2. If I had it for $2, it'd be right here. It'd be right by Manny. But anyway, no. Anyway, that's the end of the program. It's 50 years from 1904 to 1954 when they discontinued using them. But do you have any questions or anything? Oh, Jim?
Have you tried the uniform on?
No. No, that's a great question.
Great for Halloween.
Yeah, well, yeah. Scare my kids. Yeah.
You might get shot.
Yeah, I might get shot, really. Or I might have a neighbor say, "Can you arrest this guy?" No, I have not tried it on. Yeah, wow. That's a great question.
I think that would be a hit at our next show if you wore that around.
Yeah,
boots.
yeah.
With boots.
Yeah, I have to buy some boots. Any other questions? Oh, Scott?
The holster, is that the correct holster for
Yeah.
the new model?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
Sam Brown holster. Sam Brown rig. So what's interesting about that is if you were going to have they were invented or developed by a British general, and he did it because you would have swords, ceremonial swords, and they were heavy. And so you needed that strap to help them. So most of the straps you see run from the right shoulder down because you're going to pull a sword like this.
Right.
But these are, they weren't cross draw. So they're straight. So you would have the support for your gun on
So that's
this
where the
side.
weight is,
Yeah, that's where the weight is, exactly. So that's why these go the opposite way. Yes.
Relative rarity of these revolvers.
Since they had a fire in 1912 that destroyed a lot of these early ones, they're the ones that are, and the other cool part about them is they say Northwest Mounted Police. They don't say Royal like the later ones did. But they're all pretty tough because the only ones you have are the ones that got out, because now they destroy whatever they find. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, which one was Dudley Do-Right issued?
I know. I have that comic, or a comic of Sergeant Preston.
Preston, exactly.
Yeah, I've got one of those. I almost did that, but I thought it looked a little cheesy. If I did that, yeah, it would have fit, I guess. But anyway, that is the end of my program. So thanks everyone for putting up with it.